The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network, available on the free YouTube channel General Grant by Himself or Dr. E.C. Fields, on the Facebook page Kurt Fields as General Ulysses S. Grant, and on various other social media. The EHQ headquarters and campsite is generalgrantbyhimself.com. This program is one of those presentations in the ongoing series General Grant Looks at the American Civil War, wherein General Grant looks at a person, place, or event in the Civil War for reflection and observation. Permission to copy and distribute is given, and indeed is encouraged. Remember, you are the future of our past. And now, at Fort Donelson in Dover, Tennessee, on the Cumberland River, the final reports given by General Grant and surrendering General Simon B. Buckner. I'm Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant, and I should like to review for you today, in looking back on Fort Donelson, my report that I submitted on February the 16th, immediately following the surrender of the fort. And I should also like to review for you the report submitted by General Simon B. Buckner. First, mine. Headquarters, Army in the Field, Fort Donelson, February the 16th, 1862. General G.W. Cullum, Chief of Staff, Department of the Missouri. General, I am pleased to announce to you the unconditional surrender this morning of Fort Donelson, with 12 to 15,000 prisoners, at least 40 pieces of artillery, and a large amount of stores, horses, mules, and other public property. I left Fort Henry on the 12th instant with a force of about 15,000 men, divided into two divisions under the commands of Generals McClernand and Smith. 6 regiments were sent around by water the day before, convoyed by a gunboat, or rather started one day later than one of the gunboats, and with instructions not to pass it. The troops made the march in good order, the head of the column arriving within 2 miles of the fort at 12 o'clock noon, at the point the enemy's pickets were met and driven in. The fortifications of the enemy were from this point gradually approached and surrounded, with occasional skirmishing on the line. The following day, owing to the non-arrival of the gunboats and reinforcements sent by water, no attack was made, but the investment was extended on the flanks of the enemy and drawn closer to his works, with skirmishing all day. The evening of the 13th, the gunboats and reinforcements arrived. On the 14th, a gallant attack was made by Flag Officer Foote upon the enemy's works with his fleet. The engagement lasted probably 1 hour and a half, and bid fair to result favorably to the cause of the Union, when 2 unlucky shots disabled 2 of the armored boats, so that they were carried back by the tide. The remaining 2 were very much disabled, also having received a number of heavy shots about the pilot houses and other parts of the vessels. After these mishaps, I concluded to make the investment of Fort Donelson as perfect as possible and partially fortify and await repairs to the gunboats. This plan was frustrated, however, by the enemy making a most vigorous attack upon our right wing, commanded by General J.A. McClernand, with a portion of the force under General Lew Wallace. The enemy were repelled after a closely contested battle of several hours in which our loss was heavy. The officers, and particularly field officers, suffered out of proportion. I have not yet the means of determining our losses, even approximately, but it cannot fall far short of 1,200 killed, wounded, and missing. Of the latter, I understand, through General Buckner, about 250 were taken prisoners. I shall retain enough of the enemy to exchange for them, as they were immediately shipped off and not left for recapture. About the close of this action, the ammunition and cartridge boxes gave out, which, with the loss of many of the field officers, produced great confusion in the ranks. Seeing that the enemy did not take advantage of it convinced me that equal confusion and possible great demoralization existed with him. Taking advantage of this fact, I ordered a charge upon the left, enemy's right, with the division under General C. F. Smith, which was most brilliantly executed and gave to our arms full assurance of victory. The battle lasted until dark, giving us possession of part of the entrenchments. An attack was ordered from the other flank after the charge by General Smith was commenced by the divisions under Generals McClernand and Wallace, which, notwithstanding the hours of exposure to a heavy fire in the forepart of the day, was gallantly made and the enemy further repulsed. At the points thus gained, night having come on, all the troops encamped for the night, feeling that a complete victory would crown their labors at an early hour in the morning. This morning, at a very early hour, a note was received from General S. B. Buckner under a flag of truce, proposing an armistice, etc. A copy of the correspondence which ensued is herewith accompanying. I cannot mention individuals who specially distinguished themselves, but leave that to division and brigade commanders, whose reports will be forwarded as soon as received. To division commanders, however, Generals McClernand, Smith, and Wallace, I must do the justice to say that each of them were with their commands in the midst of danger and were always ready to execute all orders, no matter what the exposure to themselves. At the hour the attack was made on General McClernand's command, I was absent, having received a note from Flag Officer Foote requesting me to go and see him, he being unable to call in consequence of a wound received the day before. My personal staff, Colonel J. T. Webster, Chief of Staff, Colonel J. Riggin, Jr., Volunteer Aide-de-Camp, Captain J. A. Rawlins, Assistant Adjutant General, Captains C. B. Lago and W. S. Hillier, aides, and Lieutenant Colonel J. B. McPherson, Chief Engineer, all are deserving of special mention for their gallantry and services. For full details, see reports of Engineers, Medical Director, and Commanders of Brigades and Divisions to follow. I am General, very respectfully, your obedient servant, U.S. Grant, Brigadier General. And that was the report that I submitted. On February the 18th, 2 days later, General Simon B. Buckner submitted this report. Report of Brigadier General Simon B. Buckner, C.S. Army, commanding divisions, etc. Headquarters, Cumberland Army, Dover, Tennessee, February 18, 1862. Sir, it becomes my duty to report that the remains of this army, after winning some brilliant successes both in repulsing the assaults of the enemy and in sallying successfully through their lines, have been reduced to the necessity of a surrender. At the earliest practicable day, I will send a detailed report of its operations. I can only say now that after the battle of the 15th instant had been won, and my division of the Army was being established in position to cover the retreat of the Army, the plan of the battle seemed to have been changed, and the troops were ordered back to the trenches. Before my own division returned to their works on the extreme right, the lines were assailed at that point, and my extreme right was occupied by a large force of the enemy, but I successfully repelled their further assaults. It was the purpose of General Floyd to effect the retreat of the army over the ground which had been won in the morning, and the troops moved from their works with that view. But before any movement for that purpose was organized, a reconnaissance showed that the high ground was occupied by the enemy in great strength. General Floyd then determined to retreat across the river with such force as could escape, but as there were no boats until nearly daylight on the 16th, he left with some regiments of Virginia troops about daylight, and was accompanied by Brigadier General Pillow. I was thus left in command of the remnant of the army, which had been placed in movement for a retreat which was discovered to be impracticable. My men were in a state of complete exhaustion from extreme suffering from cold and fatigue. The supply of ammunition, especially for the artillery, was being so rapidly exhausted, the army was to a great extent demoralized by the retrograde movement. On being placed in command, I ordered such troops as could not cross the river to return to their entrenchments, to make at the last moment such resistance as was possible to the overwhelming force of the enemy. But a small portion of the forces had returned to the lines when I received from General Grant a reply to my proposal to negotiate for terms of surrender. To have refused his terms would, in the condition of the army at that time, have led to the massacre of my troops without any advantage resulting from the sacrifice. I therefore felt it my highest duty to these brave men, whose conduct had been so brilliant and whose sufferings had been so intense, to accept the ungenerous terms proposed by the Federal commander, who overcame us solely by overwhelming superiority of numbers. This army is accordingly prisoners of war, the officers retaining their sidearms and private property, and the soldiers their clothing and blankets. I regret to state, however, that notwithstanding the earnest efforts of General Grant and many of his officers to prevent it, our camps have been a scene of almost indiscriminate pillage by the Federal troops. In conclusion, I request, at the earliest time practicable, a court of inquiry to examine into the causes of the surrender of this army. I am, sir, very respectfully, your obedient servant, S.B. Buckner, Brigadier General, C.S. Army. To Colonels W.W. McCall, Assistant Adjutant General, Nashville, Tennessee. So there are the reports that I submitted initially on the surrender of Fort Donelson to myself, and the same report submitted by General Buckner to his superior officers. And thus ended the assault, struggle, and surrender of Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River at Dover, Tennessee, that opened the door to us going into Nashville, Tennessee, to recapture the first rebel state capital to fall during the war. These successes were to come, but many failures would follow as well. These are the reports I submitted and General Buckner submitted on February 16th and 18th of 1862, respectively. I am Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant, bidding you a fond adieu.